I was always an avid reader. Books were my companions and playmates. I would be forced out of the house every evening to go play with other kids, but I would end up borrowing books from neighbors and reading in the dim garden lights. What that got me really was a pair of thick glasses, some extra weight, a lot of information about a lot of things, and a not so worldly view of, well, the world. The habit of reading was helpful though. It got me through grammar school, high school, medical school in India, and landed me at the Yale School of Medicine in the US. I was 28 by that time, and I thought I had gained some sophistication and a certain world weariness. The Yale campus is beautiful. New Haven is gorgeous, especially in the fall. Having read about it so much, one of the first things I did was to roam around gape-mouthed like a 6-year-old in a candy store, looking at all the beautiful architecture and the scenery around the campus. I was stumped, and after a week, realized that I was supposed to be a sophisticated, world-weary woman, shut my mouth, and got back to the business of studying. As is typical of most grad students, I was looking for ways to supplement my parent-sponsored income. After a little bit of networking and a lot of schmoozing, I got myself appointed as a library doorkeeper at the Yale Law Library. It was a coveted position. Perks included the use of the library, the squishy, comfortable leather armchairs to snooze in, time on my own to study, and the wonderful opportunity to hear some future lawyers and lawmakers debate some point of law. Who knew? We might have the Secretary General of the UN, we might have the Premier of some country walking through the door. As a doorkeeper, one of my charges was, of course, their beloved tomes and their precious manuscripts and laptops, and their eccentric troll doll collections and feathered pen collections. I was also in charge of the flyers that were meant for social events and calendar. After a week or so, I got to know all of them pretty well, but I would still deny entry to people not having their ID, just so that in the future I could tell my grandchildren, you know, the Secretary General of the UN, I stopped her from going into the library because she didn't have her ID. No, 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 no. No entry without ID. By and large, though, students did have their ID, and therefore had no reason to converse with the doorkeeper. And plus, I was usually surrounded by a pile of readings and assignments that I had to complete. So I was hardly looking up at their ID anyways. There was one notable exception. James. Without fail, James stopped at the desk when I was working. We would chat a while in whispers, just normal stuff. He would ask me about my pile of assignments for the day and how I was doing and whether the weather was treating me right or not. It was cold and icy in New Haven in the winter, and I was from India. Even if I happened to miss looking at his ID, he would wave it at me playfully till I actually gave him permission to enter the library. Ah, James. With his curly reddish blonde hair falling over his forehead, his glasses framing startlingly blue eyes, high forehead, hawkish nose, strong chin, lips up-tilted, as if he was laughing at some foible of the world. He had an air of just having played a prank and was just waiting for somebody to catch him. Like he knew some secret of the world that you didn't. In contrast, he talked in a very slow, deliberate drawl, which somehow made him even more fascinating. Was he the prank-playing social butterfly that his looks admitted, or was he the measured, opinion-forming, deep-thinking intellectual that he spoke like? I always wondered what other layers he had every time I waved him by. James. After so many years, just saying his name evokes so many sentiments. He was my silly schoolgirl crush, a secretly linking names with hearts in my notebook kind of crush. A crush that would involve swapping my shifts to coincide with his timings in the library. Very dramatic, misery to ecstasy in a minute, high school crush. Except that this was not high school and I was 28. In keeping with my adopted persona though, I tried to pretend I was indifferent to James and tried not to grin too much after our whispered conversations at the desk. As the term wore on, however, my crush grew along with the piles of assignments cluttering my desk. I desperately tried to stay one step ahead of the reading and barely even looked up to glance at ID cards being flashed my way. Except James. I guiltily pushed aside my assignments and my pending work every time I saw James, just to catch a few moments of conversation. I learned about his frequent trips to New York and DC, the fact that he was a music graduate from Juilliard, and how he worked with up-and-coming musicians and dancers to help protect their copyrights. He was interning at Matheson's and Samuel's in Manhattan that summer, which only heightened my grandiose imagination. We would live in a Soho loft. And we would splurge on champagne the day that he would be the youngest partner of that firm. I would entertain his famous musician and friends and dancer colleagues with authentic Indian food and cocktails. I would be the exotic Indian wife who spoke impeccable English, but with an accent. By this time, I got to know James fairly well, talking about his family and mine. He was from Montana, which spawned another fantasy about acres of farmland and long, leisurely horse rides, and cold winters and fireside conversations. Every once in a while, he would surprise me with things like an invitation to an a cappella group that he was part of, invitation to volunteer for a recycling project, or picnic with Indian friends for holy celebrations. I hope the last was for me. I thought I was being very adult and hiding my crush very well, but my mentor at the library, Margaret, was on to me. She was a rosy-cheeked, sweet-looking 50-year-old lady with a soft face and a curly mop of hair. She was the assistant librarian in charge of personnel. Many people were deceived by her soft, innocent grandma looks. In reality, she was a graduate of the Yale Law School herself, had eidetic memory, and was a wizard using LexisNexis, the database that law students used. Based on the speed at which she resolved questions put to her, she apparently had the ability to read people's minds. She observed quietly my crush grow over the first few weeks, undoubtedly noting my silly blushing and the soft pink heart haze that surrounded me whenever James stopped by. There seemed to be an undercurrent of concern in our conversations, though. A certain hesitation on her part. That puzzled me. Did she like him too? Oh well, my pink heart beat unabated. At long last, the term wound to an end, bringing with it test results, plans for the summer, and this being a highly competitive environment, the next term's social calendar. James mentioned that he would be standing for student council president election in the coming year. Obviously, I was impressed. President of student council? President, student council today, and in the years to come, dare I say it? The country? The White House, I gasped to myself. Was I ready? I would make a charming first lady. I would spice up 1600 Penn Avenue. A little. A lot. In a daze, I automatically promised to help him with his campaign preparations and tried to hide my thrill at being asked. He obviously wanted to see more of me too, and this was perhaps the first of many campaign meetings where I would brainstorm and help him get started taking over the world. Just before the last day of the term, James stopped by at the library, even though exams were over. There was no reason for him to be here. We had a great conversation, interspersed with laughter and jokes, with no one to shush us. After all, that was my job, to shush people. We wished each other happy holidays and made plans to kick his campaign off in high gear in the following weeks. As he headed out, he left behind his campaign flyers for me to hand out. Still floating on my pink heart-shaped clouds, I idly picked up the topmost flyer in the pile and read, James for LGBT Council President. I paused in my rose-scented garden of my imagination and read the flyer more closely. Council, I understood. President, likewise. James, of course. My heart skipping a beat. But what in heaven's name was LGBT? I frowned at the 4 letters. Was this some special kind of presidential title? Some elite secret society skull and bones like council that the law school had? L obviously stood for law, right? Or was it legal? LGBT. Law girls and boys together? That can't be right. Baffled, I laid the flyer aside and resumed my daydreams of James. Margaret came by a little later to go over the end of term tasks and discuss the holiday shift with me. I told her James had come by and proudly pointed to the flyers on my desk for her to read. She glanced at it absentmindedly. I subtly slipped into conversation the fact that he had asked me to help him with his campaign. Margaret gave a look at the flyer again, this time carefully, and just as carefully looked at my blushing face. She started to say something, hesitated, turned away from the desk, turned back, giving me a pregnant look, asked me gently, Gauri, you do know that James is the outgoing president of the LGBT Council at Yale, don't you? As a matter of fact, I didn't. I didn't know what LGBT Council was, or the fact that James was outgoing president. Not wanting to appear in complete ignoramus, I asked her if there was something wrong with James standing for elections again. Like maybe there was some term limits or something that he was fighting the rules. Margaret, however, was focused on a different part of the flyer. She again looked at me carefully, and after a few seconds of silence, asked me gently again, Gauri, you do know what LGBT means, don't you? I sheepishly confessed I didn't. Margaret looked at me in silence for another few seconds, and even more gently said, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, as if apologizing for each of those 4 words. I was struck dumb. I was still floating, but now it felt disconnected, like I was observing the scene from out of my body. I must have made some appropriate reply because Margaret walked away from the desk. Almost dispassionately, I quietly processed the information. I considered it carefully in my mind, turning it this way and that. I saw my Soho loft drifting away, the White House dissolving into a mist. The clink of glasses at the Indian state dinner now failed to make a sound. The Montana fireplace was now cold, as cold as Brokeback Mountain. all over in my mind, all the past conversations, references, clues even. It finally sunk in. I would never be with James. I came to myself with a burst of laughter, scaring the campus tour, winding its way around the library, earning me really strange looks. Should my heart have splintered? Should I have wept instead of laughed over the perfidy of fate? Should I have fought with James for not telling me about which council president he was planning to stand to win? Somehow I thought that would be ridiculous, for he had never been more than a friendly soul to a stranger in his country. It never occurred to me that I wouldn't want to see him again. I did help him with his campaign, and he did get re-elected. How could he not? James graduated a year later and joined the prestigious Manhattan firm that he interned at. He invited me to his graduation party, where I met his partner, who was tall, dark, handsome, dashing. Maybe not as much as James, but dashing enough. I continued to work at the law library for the next 2 semesters, eventually making more friends, and even taking a couple of classes at the Yale Law School. Margaret and I still talk once in a while, about James, among other things. I meet up with him and his partner whenever I'm in New York. I'm proud to call James my friend. He is now attorney at law and an active member of the gay rights movement, as well as being a successful corporate lawyer. I imagine his workplace as a dynamic, challenging, full of important work for important clients, without a doubt. It is a collaboration of space of law girls and boys together. I still cannot comprehend who is a member of the LGBT community, but now I do know what LGBT stands for. Thank you.